Hey friends, before we dive into today's episode, I've got something exciting to share. I'm hosting a special Black Friday giveaway, and you could be one of 3 lucky winners. Here's how you enter. 1, rate the Beyond Bloated Podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts and send me a screenshot for 1 entry each. 2, leave a written review on Apple Podcasts and get 2 whole entries. And 3, share the podcast on your Instagram stories, tag me at beyond.bloated, and you'll get 2 more entries. What am I giving away? Well, first place will score a $100 Whole Foods gift card, a 1-hour virtual grocery assistant session with yours truly, my optimal gut health grocery guide, and a recorded masterclass on mastering ingredient labels. Second place will get a $25 Whole Foods gift card, the grocery guide, and the masterclass recording. And third place will grab the grocery guide and the masterclass. The giveaway ends on November 27th, and winners will be announced on November 28th. So don't miss out. Head to the link in the show notes and submit your screenshots to enter. Good luck and happy shopping. Welcome to the Beyond Bloated Podcast. I'm Carly, a certified health coach helping women ditch their bloat without having to follow super strict and stressful protocols. As someone who's struggled with all sorts of digestive issues for over 5 years, I know exactly how you're feeling. I also know that there's a way to feel better, and it doesn't have to involve tons of expensive supplements and insanely restrictive diets. Join me as I share all of my bloat-busting wisdom to help you say goodbye to that bloated belly and regain your confidence. It's time for you to move beyond bloated. How many of you have ever had your genes tested? And I'm not talking about your pants. I'm talking about the other genes, either through one of those online saliva kits, or maybe you went all out and you've had them professionally tested. I personally have never had my own genes tested, but my brother has. And we still joke today about his results because one of his markers came back and said he has more Neanderthal DNA than 68% of other customers. It can definitely be fun to get an inside look at your genes, but did you know that they could also be a key part of your gut health journey? Jaclyn Downs is our guest of the day, and she is going to share exactly how certain genes can give us some pretty big insight into our health problems. Jaclyn is a functional nutrigenomics and fertility practitioner who specializes in genetic interpretation to address lesser-known root causes. She is also the author of the academically published book, Enhancing Fertility Through Functional Medicine. In our conversation today, we discuss how Jaclyn got into this interesting field, what specific genes may be causing your histamine intolerance and what you can do about it, and how knowing your genetic makeup could make your road to healing that much quicker. If you've ever thought that you were doomed from the start because of the hand you were dealt at birth, I encourage you to give this episode a listen. Jaclyn has some amazing insight into how your genes don't determine your fate, but instead give you valuable information to get to the root of your problems. I would love to give a warm welcome to Jaclyn. Thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Carly. I'm happy to be here.
Of course. So as always, I love to give our guests the spotlight. So could you please start by sharing your journey and letting us know how you got into your field?
Yes. My dad was a nutritional biochemist, and I talk about that in my book, just how ever since I was a little kid, I've had this interest and knowledge about nutrition. And then there wasn't any nutrition programs that I was really interested in my state. So I ended up just getting undergrad in psychology and then fell into birth work. And so I became a doula and I apprenticed with a home birth midwife and did that for a few years. And it was during apprenticing with the midwife that later on became my midwife, I realized how common fertility issues were because I was in my early 20s and it just wasn't talked about. Fertility wasn't on my radar. And I realized how common it was. And I took my knowledge of how important nutrition is and saw that, what the midwife was talking about as far as, test your house for radon and do you live near any fields that are spraying pesticides and, just these environmental things and really telling them to beef up their diet with more leafy greens and stuff and then these women would get pregnant and stay pregnant. And so that was the nudge that had me want to attend graduate school in holistic nutrition. And I also became a health coach. Fast forward past all of that and having my own children, I didn't want to be on call anymore attending births because I had my own children. So I got a job as a research assistant for a local naturopath to research one gene called MTHFR. And that's typically the gene people hear about first that introduces people to the concept of how your genes can influence your state of health and your detoxification ability and your fertility. And so I started researching that, and then that turned into the whole methylation pathway, and it turned into multiple genes and multiple pathways intersecting, and it brought me to where I am today. And I have an academically published book called Enhancing Fertility Through Functional Medicine, using nutrigenomics to solve unexplained infertility. And so I talk all about genetic predispositions and metabolic pathways and all of that stuff, all of this stuff that's really common, but not commonly known about, that can affect your health. So even though the book's written towards the fertility demographic, the book is really written for anybody that has some puzzling issues and they're not getting answers. And so it's common but lesser known causes of inflammation and oxidative stress that affect our health on every level.
Wow. Okay. So that's very cool information for sure. And I know you threw a big word out there for us, which I asked you how to pronounce earlier because I'm not so good with the big words. So could you tell us a little bit about what nutrigenomics is?
Yes. So nutrigenomics is essentially the intersection between how our genes influence our health and our detoxification abilities and our nutrient status, but also how our health and our exposures and our environment and our diet affects the expression of our genes. So just because we have a genetic variant doesn't mean that it's doomed to express. And so with nutrigenomics, food and nutrients are information for our genes. And so we need to have these vitamins and minerals as nutritional cofactors or little helpers to make sure that our genes are making the enzymes and things are doing what they're supposed to do.
Very cool. So I know that's a very common thing where people think they have a specific gene, so they're doomed. They're like, well, my parent has this condition, my grandparent has this condition, I have the same gene, so it doesn't matter what I do, I'm going to get the same condition. But what you're saying is that that is not true, correct?
Correct. Now, there are like geneticists that test for gene mutations for things like muscular dystrophy and cystic fibrosis. Now, those gene mutations are really rare genetic mutations that occur in less than 1% of the population, and they greatly impact your health. Whereas functional genomics are genes that you can do something about, genes that you can support the function of and compensate for genetic variants. So it's called, instead of a mutation, which a lot of people on Instagram you will hear them call MTHFR a mutation. Technically, that is incorrect because a mutation occurs in less than 1% of the population. So having a genetic variant that is common is called a SNP, a single nucleotide polymorphism. Those are more common genetic variants, and some really impact your health and some don't impact your health at all.
Okay, that's definitely good information to know. So we're going to shift a little bit because we do want to talk about histamine in particular today. So could you tell us a little bit more about what exactly histamine is and why women should care if they have gut issues, bloating, anything like that?
Yes. So histamine is a messenger chemical, is an inflammatory messenger. And so we create histamine when our body is having a reaction to something so that we can get rid of it. So we sneeze it out, comes out like we blow it out in the tissue. Our skin shows the reaction. And so histamine is needed for certain things. It's actually needed for our stomach acid production. But it needs to be in that Goldilocks zone. And so a lot of people in our society have excess histamine. So it's either because they're getting too much of it in their diet or environment, or they have either genetic predispositions that cause their histamine bucket to be really small and get really filled, or else it overflows really quickly because the histamine isn't able to clear the body. Also, if you have gut issues, you will have more of a likelihood for having a histamine problem. And then that is a negative cycle, because then gut issues make histamine worse and histamine makes gut issues worse. And so it's a vicious cycle.
Probably a lot of us have heard the term like histamine intolerance before. So do your genes play a role in developing this histamine intolerance?
Yes, absolutely. So there's two genes that create enzymes that actually degrade histamine in the body. So unlike taking a Zyrtec or a Claritin that is an antihistamine, what people don't know, here's a fun fact, a little clinical pearl for you, is that those don't lower the histamine level in your body. What they do, and you can't see my hands here, but what they do is they block the receptor, which is like a keyhole on your cell, so that the histamine can't get in and activate the cell. And so it just shuffles the histamine around in your body. And so it can't get into the receptor that it needs to. So you don't have as many of the symptoms, but it's really not lowering your histamine levels. So we have two genes. We have an ABP1 gene and we have an HNMT gene. And those actually are what degrade histamine. Now, regarding gut health and bloating and stuff, the ABP1 gene makes an enzyme called diamine oxidase. And you can actually buy diamine oxidase supplements, or when women are pregnant, their placenta makes diamine oxidase. And that's oftentimes why women that are very histaminergic or allergenic feel great during their pregnancy, because their placenta is making that to keep the histamine levels in check. The body is just infinitely wise. So we can have genetic variants in the genes that make the diamine oxidase enzyme. We can have genetic variants in the gene that makes the HNMT, histamine N-methyltransferase. And so that's going to, right out of the gate from day one, have you not be clearing histamine as readily. And then if you get the histamine from doing a whole bunch of kombucha or sauerkraut or fermented foods or eating a lot of aged cured meats and dairy and stuff, that can fill your histamine bucket more quickly, because you're not able to clear the histamine as readily because of your genetic predisposition.
Okay, very cool. So then what type of foods are high in histamine? Like, say someone isn't really sure if they're having this issue with histamines, what foods should they look out for and be like, hey, if I eat a lot of these high histamine foods and I'm having a reaction, that might be a red flag for me?
So the general rule of thumb, while there are a lot of exceptions, it's always the longer that a food is here and sits, the more histamine it accumulates. So like I said, anything aged, cured, or fermented, so that's your alcohols, that's your vinegar-based things, your pickles, your kombucha, your yogurts, all of those are going to be higher in histamine naturally. But there are also some really, really healthy foods that are high in histamine. So I don't want people to just go and like cut out everything, just experiment with it, maybe support the degradation of histamine, rotate, so avocados, citrus, tomatoes, strawberries, those are all foods that are higher in histamine as well. Fish and shellfish too, typically.
So what you're saying is that if someone has a histamine intolerance, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to stop eating foods that are high in histamine, correct?
Right. I would just avoid the aged, cured, fermented foods. If you're unsure, just see if that alone helps you to have less bloating, less digestive discomfort, maybe less allergy type symptoms, hives, itchiness, what have you, because those are like pouring a huge cup into your histamine bucket, as opposed to, drops here and there, or small steady trickles from something else, like, if it's springtime or something like that.
Right. So if someone does this experiment and they are feeling pretty confident that histamine is an issue for them, what would you recommend besides, limiting their intake of high histamine foods?
I have a whole chapter on histamine and everything you could ever want to know about histamine in my book. And I do have recommendations at the end of every chapter. I have chapters on oxalates, chapters on fat utilization, chapters on blood sugar. So avoiding the really high histamine foods, but also fixing your gut. So supporting your gut health. So even if you don't have any ABP1 genetic variants, because diamine oxidase is made in the gut, If you have gut issues, then you're probably not going to be making diamine oxidase as readily as you could if you did have great gut health. Now, another thing would be to keep your estrogen levels in check. Try to stay away from things that are going to cause estrogen dominance, the plastics and the BPA and all of those things, because histamine and estrogen feed each other. And so one of the questions on my intake form is for the women. I mean, it's there. You don't have to answer it if you're a man, but is, do you have more symptoms around ovulation? Because right around ovulation is when our estrogen is at its highest. And so some people think, oh, well, I only get, issues around my period, but people don't really associate having symptoms around ovulation. So if you're getting migraines around ovulation, if you're having nausea, if you get skin issues, skin itchiness, or even hives, even some sleep issues too, because histamine is an excitatory neurotransmitter. So it makes your brain fire. And that's why antihistamines make you drowsy. And so sometimes anxiety, maybe you feel more anxious around your ovulation or the week before your period when your estrogen rises again. All of these things can be symptoms of excess histamine. And so when your estrogen is at its highest, then that's going to promote more histamine activity in the body.
Okay. Are you saying that your genes also play a factor in estrogen dominance, or is that because of the histamine being not processed properly?
Both. Yes, because there are so many other genes that affect our estrogen conversion and clearance, metabolism, as far as the health of your liver. How's your phase 1 liver detox? How's your phase 2 liver detox pathways? Do you have the nutritional helpers, the cofactors that help the estrogen to do what it needs? And regarding our gut health, we have a subset of our microbiome called the estrobolome. So your gut health plays a huge part in your body's ability to clear estrogen from the body.
Yes.
And so again, if we don't have good gut health and if our microbiome is out of balance, then that's going to give you more of a predisposition for histamine to be an issue.
Okay. So in your practice, have you seen, like, say someone comes in with estrogen dominance, they're having issues with histamine, and they do have the genes that you talked about that make you more susceptible to have a histamine issue?
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible for them to improve their gut health, reduce their histamine intolerance, and get rid of their estrogen dominance? Is that possible with those genes?
Yes, absolutely.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Knowing your genes can reveal so much about why something might not have worked in the past, or why a supplement might have had an adverse effect on you. And it'll help you to not waste time and money buying supplements or doing protocols that don't work because they're not jiving with what your genes are primed and their blueprint is saying is going to be the best for you. I know I didn't say that very eloquently, but your genes can really dictate what supplements would be best for you.
We'll get into that, the testing in a minute. But besides supplements, what would you say would be like the top 1 to 2 things someone could implement in their life to reduce their histamine intolerance and get out of estrogen dominance? I don't know if they would be the same thing or if you have different recommendations for each of those things.
Yeah, so the one would definitely be dietary. So you can even look up a couple different, Google images on high histamine foods, because some things will say, something's really high histamine, and another site will say that it's moderately high. But again, aged, cured, or fermented. The other thing is that stress exacerbates a histamine issue. And so supporting your adrenal health and your adrenals, your cortisol, your sex hormones and your stress hormones are all on the same circuit. And so if you have a lot of stress, that's going to affect your sex hormones. And so keeping your stress manageable by doing stress management and mind-body practices and stuff like that will help keep cortisol under tabs so that your estrogen is not going to cause an issue. And then therefore that's going to cause a histamine issue. Then that's going to lead to some GI issues, perhaps. So histamine can manifest differently in different people depending on where your weak link is, or which histamine receptors might have genetic variants. And so, as you know, like some people will get hay fever and other people will get digestive discomfort.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up stress. Actually, I've talked about stress extensively on this podcast. I have an entire episode dedicated to stress management because you've just said it, it impacts your hormones, it impacts your histamine tolerance, and it also significantly impacts your gut health. Like, you cannot digest food when you are stressed.
Yes, and that totally affects your fertility as well. And so that's why I have a whole entire chapter in my book that it doesn't matter what your genes are. These are things that are going to benefit stress and supporting the parasympathetic, which is your rest, digest, reproduce, repair state, nervous system state. And so these are things just like putting your feet in the earth and getting enough sleep and getting sunshine every day. And then there's, breathing techniques and body somatic techniques and stuff like that. So I have a whole chapter on stress because, as you know, stress impacts us in such a negative way on many, many levels.
Hey everyone, Carly here. If you are tired of feeling bloated and uncomfortable, which I know you are, I have something that can really help. My free ultimate guide to bloat busting. I've been there myself, and I know how frustrating it is to try super restrictive diets and expensive supplements without getting results. If those methods were going to work, they would have worked by now. That's why I created this guide to offer you a different approach. In the ultimate guide to bloat busting, you'll learn techniques to listen to your body and eat with intention, avoiding overeating and choosing foods that truly benefit you, tips for proper hydration to support digestion and reduce bloating, a guide to delicious foods that promote a healthy gut and how to easily incorporate them into your meals, and effective methods to manage stress, which plays a huge role in gut health. These simple, practical strategies can make a big difference in your daily life, helping you feel lighter, more energized, and comfortable in your own skin. Ready to ditch the bloat without strict diets or costly supplements? Download your free copy today at beyondbloated.com/ultimate-guide and start your journey to a bloat-free life. Now, let's get back to it.
Yeah, I love that you have a whole chapter dedicated to that because it is so impactful and it's so overlooked. You tell people manage your stress and they're like, yeah, but what supplement do I need? And we don't focus on the little things, like you said, sunlight, breathing, just little things like that can make such a big difference. And it personally took me a long time to realize that. I was in the mindset of wanting a quick fix for a very long time. And it wasn't until I started doing these little things to manage my stress, to get more daily movement in, that I really saw improvements in my health. So Don't overlook it. Read the chapter on stress and implement these things.
All of those things are typically free or very inexpensive.
Yeah, even more reason to do them. You don't have to pay. You don't have to pay anything to do them. Just go outside to start. That's a great one. So let's say someone wants to know if they have all these genes that you've talked about. I read your bio that it can be difficult to find a good company to get like genetic testing. So can you tell us a little bit about what you should look for when you're trying to get your genes tested?
Yes. So because we're in what is kind of considered the wild, wild west of genetic interpretation right now, there's all kinds of companies popping up, and it's a kind of a hot topic, especially in functional medicine circles, and everybody's jumping on the bandwagon. And so they are only showing you a sliver of the genetic information, and you can't get a full picture. So in my book, I say that's like saying that what a puzzle looks like based on 2 or 3 or 12 pieces, but you don't realize that that puzzle could have 500 pieces. It could have 2,000 pieces. And, as far as our genes go, there's, 23,000 genes and hundreds of thousands of SNPs, genetic variants within all of those genes. So make sure that you're getting a company that is not just testing a handful of genes. You want to have more than, there's one influencer that tests 6 genes, which blows my mind that he's making so much money with 6 genes because you can't tell anything with that. Then there's other companies that look at a few dozen. That's a little bit better, but no gene works in isolation as far as functional genomics goes. There's always genes upstream and downstream that can affect it. So I would say look for companies that are going to be testing many, many, many genes, thousands of genetic variants, then getting a trained eye, a live human that knows your health history, that knows your diet, that knows what worked, that knows what supplements you've taken and it didn't work, and knows your stress levels and your exposures, because your genes, just because you have the genetic variants doesn't mean that they're expressing, right? And there's so many different areas we can look at your genes. And so if you just do the upload your DNA and it spits out an automated canned response report, that's not personalized. That's just reporting about your genetic variants. And so oftentimes, many clients come to me with this. They've uploaded their genes and they get this report or 37 different reports in one service. And well, in this report, it tells me to take methylfolate, but in this report, it tells me to avoid methylfolate. So what do I do? Right. And so those just cause more confusion and more analysis paralysis. So I would recommend having a live human interpret your genes that has taken a very in-depth intake form so that your genetic interpretation can be ultra personalized for your diet, your lifestyle, your level of stress, your level of activity, what you're trying to accomplish. Do you have anxiety, or do you have bad periods, or do you have sleep issues, or do you want more exercise endurance, all of these kind of things.
Do you have a recommendation? Like, do you have a company in mind, or is that not something you talk about?
I do use a company called Functional Genomic Analysis, but it's for practitioners only. It's not direct to consumer because there's so much information there, and often like there's a whole training course and everything. So you can get that through me through my website at jaclyndowns.com. The website that I use, or the software that I use, is compatible with 23andMe because that's what it was built off of originally. But in 2017, 23andMe changed their chip and they took out 7,000 relevant SNPs, and they didn't tell anybody that was going to happen. And so I feel the new version, which is version 5, it'll say in your raw data, it doesn't give me enough information to give my clients a comprehensive analysis. Plus, as I've been saying, this is my soapbox, those companies don't make their money off of you. The reason why their genetic test kits are only $100 or less is because they're making their money selling your information to third parties to do who knows what with. And so just a couple months ago, like everybody on the board of 23andMe stepped down except for the CEO. There was like data breaches and everything. And so I would go with the small companies that don't sell your information to third parties. And for mine, you can use an alias, and you can also request to have your data destroyed. And so you're really just a barcode number anyway. So it's super secure. And the software that I use uses the same server that the government uses. And so it's very, very secure.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, what big company isn't trying to make money off us in some unethical way? Right. So it totally makes sense to go with the small guy, or, work with someone who has access to something that you as an individual don't, like you just talked about. So that being said, let's say, someone has been struggling for a long time and they want to test their genes. They want like a tailored roadmap based on their unique gene makeup. How can they get a hold of you and work with you?
They can go to my website, jaclyndowns.com. At the top of the homepage, in addition to all of my 5-star and only 5-star reviews, I have a resources page there. And so you can learn more about my book. You can learn, even on my homepage, you can learn more about my book and more about genetic testing and the benefits. And then you can click to see the different packages that I offer. And so what I do is you have to fill out your meticulously detailed intake form in order for me to even start doing your genetic interpretation, because I really want to make it personalized. So I do a typed document that's typically about 40 pages, give or take 10 or 20. And then I go through the software showing you your genes. and I go through the document that I typed with all of the genetic variants that I am seeing that are noteworthy. And then I make a video of that. And then I send you that video. So you get a video, you get access to your genome, and you get a typed personalized, ultra personalized report. And then you can schedule a consultation with me at any point if you want to go deeper, get more information, or get some questions answered, or, want more specific information.
That's very cool. I myself am a big data nerd. I have a math degree, so I love data. I love numbers and all that. So getting in there and seeing, what's really going on based on like facts, you're not guessing what's going on. You see it. That's very cool to me. So I love that you're doing that and that you're helping people in this way. I'll definitely link all of that information in the show notes so people can reach you and learn more about their genes and what's going on. So this has been incredible. Thank you so much for sharing all this information with us. This has been one of the coolest episodes I think we've recorded. I'm a nerd, so I loved it. Thank you so much.
I thoroughly enjoyed nerding out with you, and I would love to do it any other time. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Beyond Bloated podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to subscribe and leave a review. And don't forget to share this podcast with your fellow gut goddesses. If you'd like to chat about today's episode, send me a DM on Instagram at beyond.bloated. Until next time, bye!